In this video, I'll take you through the steps required to build a multilingual virtual assistant with Watson Assistant and the SDL Machine Translation Edge service. To get started, let's take a quick look at a virtual assistant that we've already built with Watson on IBM Cloud. If I go into Watson Assistant here, you'll see that I have just one virtual assistant created. I've called it Customer Care. I've built the assistant with the Customer Care sample skill that comes with any new instance of Watson Assistant. That's an unchanged sample skill. And I've enabled the assistant to use the web chat integration here. So if I click into that, let's take a look at the embed tab. With the web chat integration, we get the option to, with this script, easily launch a user interface that allows us interact with Watson Assistant really easily. So to see how that works, if I were to copy this script here and save it into, with a text editor file that I call, in this instance, just sample.html file, and load that into a browser, we can take a look and see how the web chat works with Watson Assistant. You'll see that what I get is this web chat launcher in the bottom right hand corner of my screen, and when I click into that, I get this web chat user interface that allows us engage with the assistant. I know that this assistant is trained to answer questions like what can you help me with, and it should tell us some of the areas that it's been trained to support us on, and it can answer questions around store locations and opening hours, and we can ask where are your stores located, and we should get a response from the assistant that tells us stores are located by Union Square. So this virtual assistant is one that was built and trained in English. All the intents and the intent examples are English, and the dialogue tree is all built in English. To enable this to support other languages using the SDL Machine Translation Edge service, I've documented some instructions on this GitHub repository here. And actually, when I publish this video, I'll make a link to the repository available with it. If we look at the information that's available here, the solution outline, I guess, gives us a good sense for the different components that are involved in building out this scenario with a multilingual virtual assistant. You'll see the web chat component here. We enable via the event system that's available with the web chat integration a couple of events that allow us make calls out to Cloud Functions actions, and we use these Cloud Functions actions to make calls to the SDL Machine Translation Edge REST API where translation takes place. I won't go through the sequence of all the calls here. It's worth spending a moment on this yourself, though, just to understand what's going on under the covers, I guess, when you build out this solution. The steps to follow to build this solution are really straightforward, and there's just a couple to follow. The first thing that we'll do is go and work with the Cloud Functions. You'll remember the Cloud Functions here are used to make calls to the SDL MDE REST API. I provide a Node.js file that we can use as the foundation of these Cloud Functions. And so to take a look at that now, you'll see that there is source code here that actually, if you look through, you'll see is really just making an authenticated REST API call to the SDL MDE API. And as I say, we'll use that as the foundation of the Cloud Functions actions that we'll create. So if I go back to IBM Cloud here and go to Functions and click on Start Creating and click on Action, I'll go and create our first Cloud Functions action. Remember, we're using this to make calls to the SDL MDE REST API where translation is going to take place. And so, this first action is going to be used where, let's say, the end user enters French into the web chat user interface, and we want to translate that to English before it's ever sent to Watson. So we're going to have French to English action here. So SDL translate FRA to ENG. I'm going to change the runtime to node 12, and I'm going to click on create. I'm simply going to select this and paste it over with the source from the Node.js file that's included on our GitHub repo here. A couple of things that we need to update. Importantly, we need to include our API key. This is the API key that we use to access the SDL Machine Translation Edge REST API. I've got mine just saved for convenience here, and I'll update that here. And then also importantly is to update the language pair ID. So the REST API that we're using from SDL is this quick translations API, and that requires this language pair ID so that it knows what the source language is and what the target language to translate to is. Actually, what's really useful is they provide this anything to English language pair ID. So in this instance, I don't need to be especially specific, and I can use actually this string that's available here that'll tell the API to translate whatever it receives to English. So I can click on save for this action, and the next thing that I'll need to do, if I look back at our instructions here, is to enable that action as one that can be called as a web action. So I've already gone and updated with my API key and done the work with the language pair ID. Next step, enable it as a web action. So if I go back here, if I go to endpoints and if I click into enable as a web action, click save and copy here. This is important. What this allows us to do actually is allows us from our web chat events to make calls quite readily via this URL to the Cloud Functions action. So I copy this value here as I just did, and actually make sure that I keep a record of it, so I'll just paste it here. I'm going to create another action now that's going to be from English to French, but actually rather than me take you through all the steps, let me stop talking and I'll go and I'll just do this, and then we'll catch back up in a moment when I've created the action. Okay, so I've just gone and created the action that'll allow us translate from English to French. If I take just a quick look at the code here, as before I had to update with my API key, but I guess what's different with this particular language pairing is that I had to provide a much more specific language pair ID. So I have this English to French language pair ID that I actually got from the SDL MDE REST API, this language pair method here that when called tells me what language pairs are supported on my account, and so I use this here to get the detail that I ultimately plugged into the language pair ID here. As before, I went and I enabled as a web action, and I've copied the URL, so we're good to go. Back to our instructions and follow on with what's next. So next up, we need to work with the web chat UI. As before, I provide a sample file for us to use, and there'll be some updates that we'll need to make to that. If I go and I look at this translate.html file here, what we'll need to do as before is copy the source that I make available and scroll up and just copy what we need. And if I go back to my text editor, create a new file and drop in that HTML and a file, save this as translate.html and click on save. Actually, it looks like I already had one. I'm going to save over it. Okay, so the things that we'll need to update here are the integration ID as it relates to our Watson assistant, the region, and the service instance ID. All of those are available from the embed script that we used in the earlier sample.html file. So actually, for this, it should be as easy as copying this across and going over these guys here and save that. And then we'll also need to update the handlers, right? So you remember when we looked at the solution outline earlier, we talked about the event system and the different events that we'd enable, and we enable those through these handlers that I have included in this translate.html file. And so what we'll need to do then is update the endpoint for the pre-send handler, and this is going to be the endpoint for our Cloud Functions action, and for the pre-receive handler. The pre-send handler is used to translate any text that's input by the end user before it's sent to Watson Assistant. So again, if you think that the end user is going to enter French here, and we want to translate that to English before it gets to Watson Assistant, then we'd go and we'd take the URL for the French to English Cloud Functions action, and we drop that in here. Actually, one important thing that I need to make sure that I do here after I do that paste is add a .json extension. Let me save that file so I don't lose changes. And then same for the receive handler. So the receive handler, what that does is it allows for any text that's returned back from Watson Assistant. You know, as Watson Assistant answers a question that it's been asked, it's going to return the response in English, but we'll want to translate that to French before that gets sent back to the end user. And so in this example, we're going to go and take this English to French endpoint and overwrite this value here. And as before, we need to make sure that we put in this .json, and we will save. And actually at this point, we should be good to test that the assistant that was running with English only earlier now runs as a French virtual assistant. So if I go and I launch the translate.html file, and if I open that with my browser, you should see that when I click into the web chat launcher here, that the initial welcome message is in French, and it is good stuff. So that was actually an invocation of the pre-receive handler. So text was sent from Watson Assistant and it was translated before it ever made its way back to the end user. Just to see then that we can ask questions in French and get the responses in French, I've gone and pre-prepared some questions here because I don't speak French. But if I paste that in, that's the same question around what can you help me with that we asked before in English. And we should get the response back saying that you can help with things like store locations and other opening hours. I recognize that. And so we can ask then, as we did before, about, you know, where are your stores located? And we drop that in here, and we hopefully see that they're located by Union Square as before, and we do, right? So this is the translation scenario, I guess, complete with Watson Assistant and the SDL MDE API. I hope actually by following this, you'll see that it's not difficult in any way to achieve this integration. There's really not a lot of work that needs to be done configuring some events in the web chat UI and the Cloud Functions actions. And once you've access to the SDL MDE API, you should be all set. I hope you found this useful, and thanks for your time.